Hey, welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Bourbon Bytes. I'm your host, Terry McGraw from Cape Endeavors Incorporated. I am pleased and blessed to be joined by Alexandra Rose. She is the Director of Threat Research at Sophos, also a former threat director or a threat research director at SecureWorks as well. Post-acquisition, she's now serving in that function for Sophos. Thank you so much, Alex, for being here.
Thanks for having me, Terry. I look forward to talking. Obviously, we've spent much time doing that in the past, so happy to do it here.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, I've been really blessed. A lot of my podcasts thus far have been people who I know really well, or I've worked with a long time, and so we fit both of those. Alex, you are also former military. That's also seems to be an unintended theme. Is that a lot of my network, of course, are former military. I think a lot of in the cyber field do tend to come out of that arena. But just for the audience's benefit who don't know you as well as I do, can you just sort of tell us your background and how you sort of came from, how you got to where you are now?
Yeah, it's a bit of an interesting one because I originally went to school to be an elementary school teacher. And I'm from Iowa, went to school to be a teacher and said, oh, this is what I've always wanted to be, and got to the end of school there and said, I can always come back to this. Let me join the military. I had family that had been in the Air Force, and so I knew a little bit about it and said, this world where there's clearances and stuff sounds kind of neat. Let me go do that for a couple years. I can always come back and teach after that. And well, I never looked back. So I joined the Air Force. I was a linguist originally, went right in working at the National Security Agency, and got exposure to working missions and doing analysis there, and realized, oh, I like this. I love this. I think I'm pretty good at it, picking up, the pieces and connecting the dots. And I really didn't look back. And so I did 6 years in the Air Force, and then transitioned right out of the Air Force into being a federal civilian, working in that national security space, in a variety of roles, from analytic type roles to technical leadership, operational leadership, and then building teams that were interagency teams across the U.S. government. So getting to build partnerships across the interagency and then globally, which was a really fun time, expanding my mission set. So looking at all things, counterterrorism, plus what was going on with Russia, China, Iran, North Korea. And a few years ago, I got a phone call that said, hey, we're looking for somebody that might know how to build out government partnerships at this company called SecureWorks. And I said, I love what I'm doing, but I'll take a call. And obviously that call went great, and I've been here ever since. So focused on building out government partnerships and making sure that we can work together to really build our collective understanding of what's going on in the threat landscape, and turn that into actionable intelligence that helps us protect our customers, but that we also feed back into that broader community I came out of. Because I think that working together, those public-private partnerships really move the needle. We've seen those evolve greatly over the last several years, and that's been so much fun to be on this side of it. But then also connecting that to the research side of the house. So understanding the kind of great work that our threat researchers are doing, and then bringing that to life. And so it's been really fun. Haven't really looked back. Every step of the way, it's something new, and I'm happy to take the jump into something new and then realize, oh, this is pretty great.
Well, I mean, you don't undersell how effective you were in the roles that you've had. I mean, when you were working on the military and the civilian side, you were a trusted insider for a lot of key elements in the government, and you continue that trust. In fact, I mean, now you're also in charge of government relationships for Sophos for a reason, right? I mean, you're still well respected in that area, so don't sell yourself too short on that.
It's a fun space to be in, right? So that was what made making the jump a little bit easier, because I felt like I got one foot in that world that I really grew up in and loved, and came to I think thrive in. But also, how do you build that up and make it successful in this other partnership? Especially in a space like cybersecurity, where I think now more than ever, those public-private partnerships really matter. We know that the private sector is doing the protecting of so much of our public infrastructure, critical infrastructure, and beyond. And so, yeah, it's definitely fun to be able to kind of dip in and out of each side and figure out how you bring those pictures together.
It's interesting. And we've worked really closely together for a long time. But I don't want to undersell also the work you've done in the commercial space. You took a lot of those same skills, and in fact, I've made the argument that you actually have to be better when you do threat research in the commercial world, because you don't have access to unlimited budgets and the capability and the authorities, if you will, to do the things that we could do on the intelligence gathering side. What are your views on sort of the commercial intelligence apparatus? And you've had a lot of success stories with agencies that have leveraged your intelligence and your insights. So, yeah, how do you feel about sort of the commercial versus the government side when it comes to threat research?
Yeah, I think you put it rightly there, that there are some similarities, but there are definitely some differences in some key places where your mission at hand changes your approach, I think. I kind of came up in an agency where our job was to know what's going on in the threat landscape, and it's other people's job to action that, right? And action that means a lot of different things. Sometimes it's just building an understanding. Sometimes it's building actual plans to counter whatever you're talking about. But ultimately, that's somebody else's job. But when we are in the situation that we're in here, it is about taking our understanding of that threat landscape and making it actionable right away. So sometimes that is, making sure that it's put into detections and protections to make sure organizations are defended against these threats. And one of the things that I also talk about often is it comes down to your aperture. I know we've spent a lot of time talking about this in the past, but not all threat intelligence is created equal. That doesn't, that's not to take one, type of threat intelligence and bring it down relative to others, but it's about knowing what you bring to the table. And so I've been really lucky to, one, work in an organization where we're gaining our understanding of that threat landscapes through so many different, pieces of the pie, through incident response work, through protecting customers globally, through teams on the dark web, and the list goes on. These government partnerships are included in that. And so it is the ability to collect from a wide range of activities to better understand what's going on. But I think the other part of that, though, is when I came from the government world, there's just pretty much acknowledgement of the value that your organization brought, and there was no doubt about the value that brought to the table. Of course, that would evolve mission to mission, what role it played, but there was no doubt about the value. But you come to our space, and sometimes I think it's a little bit hard to understand why threat intelligence is so important. And the way that I talk about it, one, is from a point of, I clearly believe that it's very important. But it's our job to help folks understand why it's so important. And really, I think threat intelligence is most valuable when it's available at the moment it's needed. Most people are not tracking the daily shifts in adversary behavior, but we are. I work really closely with our research teams and the people building systems to make sure that when questions arise, whether that's because there's a breaking news, somebody gets a call from the CEO, maybe Terry, you're that CEO, giving somebody a call saying, what's going on here? But we've all been on the receiving end of somebody saw something on the news while they were in a waiting room somewhere. Somebody else heard from a peer of theirs, hey, they've been impacted by this ransomware. What the heck is this? And that's the moment when having threat intelligence available really matters. They had a suspicious event in their environment, and you want to be able to give details on what that is. And so I think threat intelligence provides clarity. Threat intelligence helps you figure out best how to prioritize. And really, I think it's something that really helps us level set. Because if everything is a hair on fire moment, then nothing is a hair on fire moment. It really helps us pull out what the priorities are and then how we can best prepare and respond from there. And so I think that, if I had to summarize that in one sentence, it's going back to, I came from a world in government where the value of threat intelligence, there was no doubt about it. And now we are working with organizations where I think on the surface level, everyone agrees it's valuable, but they have to be able to use it. It has to be there when they need it. It needs to be actionable. It needs to be protecting them, and helping them drive their own mission of protecting their organizations forward.
Yeah, I think in threat and research in particular it's very hard to pull the thread directly on pragmatic implementation in the environment. But I'll give an example where I think it pays big dividends. Is that you and your research and your team's research provide a lot of data of predicted behavior, meaning you've been studying threats with fair medium to high attribution levels, and it helps one when you're dealing with maybe an intrusion or even a breach, understanding who you're up against, what are their behaviors, what are the likelihood of next actions, how containment activity, their behavior when it comes to maybe ransom negotiation, et cetera, and all of that can be very, very helpful. God forbid someone's actually in a situation where a threat group is actually coming after them. Yeah. Is that follow along with your experience? How else is what you do pragmatic from the commercial industry perspective?
Yeah, I think I'm one that is spot on right there, right? If you have somebody with a specific intrusion, and you have a threat intel component, so our team coming alongside that, trying to better understand what's going on, you have a leg up in terms of where do I look next? How do they normally act here? What are their normal TTPs that they're carrying out, and where should we look? What's our own checklist that we should do? It also helps when we're able to understand a bit more about the threat actor. So if you've been impacted by ransomware, or you've been impacted by a state-sponsored threat actor, in the moment, a lot of your response actions are going to be pretty similar, right? You want to evict that threat actor, you want to get back to a place of security, and then improve and harden your environment from there so it doesn't happen again. But after that, often there are other things to consider. So if you were hit by ransomware by nature is what we call opportunistic threat. Yes, it impacts certain countries or certain industries a bit more than others, but that comes down to a variety of reasons. They're not actually targeting certain industries usually.
Right.
They are looking for the opportunity to get in, they work to get in, make some money, and move on. And that part about moving on is really key there. Whereas if you were, for example, impacted by a Chinese state-sponsored threat actor, we often talk about it like, if you were in the room with the state-sponsored threat actor and on the board in China, they had your organization's name on it. It's not like they got in, you did a response job, and you evicted them, and then they were like, we're going to erase that name off the whiteboard. No, the name stays there. They are persistent. They are consistent. They keep figuring out how they want to return. And so times like that, when we can talk about attribution and who is really behind this activity, in the moment, it may not impact exactly how you're going to respond, although it does come to bear. But in the moment, you're trying to evict them. But it's that follow-on plan, understanding that, I've been targeted by this state-sponsored threat actor. What do we need to consider here? Why might they be coming after us? And then you start to get to those motivations and better understanding of why it might be a threat to you and your organization. And then that's a broader conversation that you have, not only within your security teams, but of course your leadership teams, and understanding how you protect against those threats.
That's a great segue into an area that I really wanted to talk about with you is China in particular. And every nation state sort of has their own flavor of personality, if you will, cyber personality. China, of course, like their kinetic capabilities, has only continued to grow and become more and more powerful. We used to call near peer competitor, but I would argue that today they are a competitor. They're not near peer, and as such, in a lot of respects, do pose a direct threat to the U.S. and not only economically but in a geopolitical environment. So what's different in your perspective about China and the cyber threat they pose? Maybe something that's not kind of as intuitive or as common knowledge as ones would think.
Yeah.
Ooh, China bad, but like what specifically makes them unique?
Well, I think that we've seen China evolve over the years, right? You go back, 5 to 10 years ago, and it was about stealing intellectual property. So stealing the IP so that they could create the technologies themselves, build an economy around it, make money for their country. And while some of that still goes on, without a doubt, um, they're more about fully embedding themselves in infrastructure that decides who gets trusted. Now, why is that important? Well, it's about pre-positioning. And so I think if I take a step back here, when I talk about the threat from China, sometimes it's a little bit hard to get a grasp on because, like you say, this is the boogeyman or something, and that's not the response that we want people to have. We want people to recognize that, yeah, we've got ransomware out here, and ransomware grabs headlines. People know it can take their network offline. It costs them money to get back online, whether they pay the ransom, whether they're just paying for recovery, whatever it is they're doing. But their operations are often directly impacted by ransomware, and that impact is just apparent. It's apparent to the security teams. It's apparent to the broader team. It's apparent to your executives and your boards. But when it comes to China, it's a bit more quiet. It's a bit more strategic, and it's harder to connect the state-sponsored threat activity to the broader what's that impact to me kind of mentality.
Mm-hmm.
And when it comes to China, and I mentioned already about they're really focused on not just getting into steal data at this point. They're focused on getting into systems that are the core of our trust frameworks. So we've seen over the last few years these different supply chain attacks. So getting into a specific type of network to pivot from there. It's not that they're looking to if we look at what they've done with the telecom infrastructure, it's not that they're looking at each of those telco operators. They're looking there because that's a rich environment to pivot elsewhere. And that is a tactic that they are absolutely taking. And when we talk about how this matters, we're talking about a collective security issue. So it's not just about protecting your business, it's about protecting the broader ecosystem. Because when one organization is compromised, it can really ripple outward. And so you talk to organizations, we've both probably talked to organizations, they're like, this is the cost of doing business that China is in here. But when you start to put into context of the current geopolitical landscape, you start to see China's own stated goals of going after Taiwan. You understand what kind of valuable resources come from Taiwan. There's a lot of broader implications there that, quite frankly, you need like a big old conversation sometimes to talk through. It doesn't feel like a direct threat. And so I often say, let's talk about China. Companies and organizations that are directly targeted by them, we absolutely need to be having the conversations. We need to be making sure that their security teams and their boards understand why China would be going after them. And sometimes it's not as obvious. Sometimes you're like, I'm not a defense contractor. Why would they care about me? That was probably an accident. Well, they care because if they pursue their goals in terms of Taiwan, for example, and there's a conflict, potential kinetic type conflict. Whenever you're in conflict, and you know better than most people, you want your adversary looking inward because that's a distraction. If they are focused on the chaos in their own country, they are less focused on the adversary at hand there. So we've seen China, yes, going after critical infrastructure type things, but we see them going after broader things that would sow chaos in our communities. As a mom of 3 kids, if my kids can't go to school for a day, okay, I'm in the Midwest, we get snow, that happens, right? A couple days, okay. But you start to make that longer and longer, that becomes really problematic. If I'm not able to go to the urgent care, it's not just about taking down big hospitals, but it's like the local resources that matter in my life. If I can't use a card to pay at the grocery store, I don't know about you, but most people aren't carrying around cash. And you start to have all of these other things that sow chaos. And we're not just in a hypothetical world here. There's a lot of reporting that's come out of our government. We've done our own incident response work for organizations impacted by China, many of which meet that mark of, why here? Like, this doesn't make sense. But it does make sense in their current play. And so it's a lot of words to say. It's really hard to talk about this collective security conversation where, yes, in the moment, you might not see the direct impact to you or your operations, but it is part of a really well drawn out strategy. And so it's an important conversation. And if I
Yeah,
may
I
just,
mean, go ahead.
oh, if I may, just one more thing there. This is why I often tell people, if the China conversation is not one you're going to be able to have, you're not going to be able to have this long time to have the conversation here. Guess what? If you're protecting against things like ransomware, you are protecting against things like what China is doing. It is about continually improving our security. So we need to talk. Let's tell the stories that matter. Recognize who our audiences are and where we need to talk about those things, and then and just be willing to have the serious conversations.
Yeah, I mean, so there's a couple thoughts. I mean, that as always, you're very eloquent and very knowledgeable on this. You know, the reality is, yes, cybercrime and the defenses that you put up against, a ransomware attack are very effective for remote access. But nation states are different. They'll hire people to work in your environment, right? As we've seen, right? They will hire folks to work inside your organization, and now you have a problem of insider access. But I've used the analogy that after Hurricane Katrina, like within 72 hours, people were killing each other for power, for food and water. So imagine if I turn your power off in the lower 48, even a series of states, much less all of them. And I do that to a point where you have to completely rebuild your systems. We're talking back to the Stone Age, right? America and the United States is the thinnest veneer of civility, right? I mean, as soon as you take away, life-sustaining things like water and food and the conveniences that we've had. I mean, look at teenagers if you deny them internet access on their phone, right? I mean, you get absolute meltdowns, right? And so imagine that to a degree in the United States. And I don't think people fully appreciate how interconnected the commercial environment and our governmental systems are in the United States, right? I mean, we use commercial telecom. We use the same infrastructure to do mass transit and to a degree, right?
Yeah.
For as others, and so you can't look at it as a vacuum, like, oh, it's only affecting commercial telecom. Oh, it's only a commercial utilities, et cetera. The reality is that infrastructure is very interconnected. Do you agree? Thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think that's why I talk about the public-private partnerships and why I really love the work of building up relationships with our government partners. And this is not just in the US, this is around the globe. But because we are continually more and more intertwined, private sector is often protecting governments even, right, around the world.
Right.
And so it is the ability to bring each of our unique views together to better do what we do. Also to tell the stories of what's going on. Sometimes if you have just the government saying something or just a private sector saying something, there's a little bit of doubt in people's minds. And the more of us that are seeing parts of this unfold that are talking about it, I think better. One, we want to make sure that people have visibility into what's going on. But it's not the boy who cried wolf situation. There are actual things happening here that are impacting organizations that lend itself to what the China strategy is. And now the point I'll make here is, you know what? I sure as heck hope that we never see it. I hope we never see these things come to play because geopolitical, goals and objectives change, whatever it is. But that is why I go back to the point that if you are protecting yourself against a variety of things happening in the threat landscape, you are helping the collective here. You are helping protect against these national security threats. And so what is good for business is good for national security in this context. And so that protection really matters. And I know like these are hard conversations. You talk about hearts and minds types conversations, and you've got people at different places in terms of understanding what's going on or their level of care about this particular issue. But that is what makes cybersecurity a bit interesting to me. And it's from an understanding what's going on in the threat landscape, there's a lot to learn and dive into. And unfortunately, that means that there is something in that threat landscape that is relevant to every organization out there, big or small. There are things in that threat landscape evolving, and that you need protection against. That incremental progress really matters. It matters whether we're talking about the big national security issues like China, or we're talking about business email compromise and phishing emails that you're getting that then could lead to ransomware.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, and I do think that cybersecurity, and I look back over, the last 20, 30 years, and this has remained true. It might be the only bipartisan thing that the government agrees on, right? I mean, I don't care what size you are. If you look at the genesis of what is now the CMMC program, I mean, it's several administrations ago, the thread of trying to bring some unification, synergy, and some concentration on cybersecurity, both in the government and the commercial entity. It's continued to gain attention and momentum, and rightly so. It needs it, and it needs to be bipartisan, because you are right. The collective whole really depends on us doing this well for lots of reasons. I mean, commercial as well as governmental. I don't think folks really do appreciate the extent of the problem until they're affected by it, right? And with
Yeah.
nation state activity, we certainly don't want to be affected by the problem if we can, but that doesn't mean we can't collectively work at it. And so, on the CMMC program, in particular, the Cyber Maturity Model Certification Program, where the DoD has said, you know what, we've been telling you to do this for decades. It's time to inspect your homework. Do you have thoughts on that? Sort of what governmental, so compulsory language like Sarbanes-Oxley for the cyber world? Do you have any particular, feeling personally on sort of the government's role in helping drive behavioral changes in the commercial world?
Yeah, I think I've got lots of thoughts. Some of them I think are fully coherent and build on one another. Some of them I'm still working through. But I think what I've got a couple things here. One, I think it's really important that from the government in particular, that it is absolutely clear that cybersecurity is a strategic priority. So you talk about whether you talk about your own organization, you talk about in your own family as like a parent, or our own country, there is something to the person or the group or the entities at the top modeling what is good behavior,
Mm-hmm.
showing people that this is a strategic priority. I think that there's been a lot of evidence over the last several years about cybersecurity as a strategic priority, not only in the US, but in many countries around the world. I think that is really key. Now, from there, I think that there are a variety of things that we need to consider. Some of those are the different frameworks and minimal standards. If you're going to be working with government, I think it's absolutely okay to be setting what those standards are. How are you going to meet those? Because they being the government, needs to protect what their mission is, because they have a mission to help defend and make our homeland safe and make it optimal for businesses to operate in this world. And so I think there are a lot of different programs, whether that's CMMC, whether that's conversation around FedRAMP. I think that many people can agree minimal standards are important. The ability to go through those programs and not cost 25% of a company's budget is going to be important. You want competition in that space because you don't want a single company to be the sole provider of X for anything. I think that that's bad for any one of us. We've seen big changes though, in those programs. You talk about CMMC. I'm looking at things like FedRAMP as well. We see them figuring out how to better streamline this and make them not only make them better and easier to use, but bringing others into the mix and making sure that this is a competitive space. I think that that's really important. But it's a space I think we're going to continue to see evolve. The foundation definitely needs to be cybersecurity as a strategic priority, and that will then play out in many ways. We want to continue to enhance, or in the case of CISA 2015, which I don't want to get that confused with CISA, the agency, but the framework that allows for sharing. We want that, we want that re-signed, there's a couple different proposals forward. Things that create frameworks that lower people's concerns about sharing information so that we all get better are really, really important. And so I I want the debates to be
Well,
happening. I want
it,
the conversations out there, and then us continuing to learn on it. But it really matters most when it's a strategic priority, because that's where we build
you
from.
bring a really good point about information sharing, and one I don't think we talk about nearly enough. In the commercial world, no one wants to share the crap that happens to them for financial reasons, right? And reputational damage and trust, et cetera. But through information exchange, we get stronger, right? And so we need to figure out how to make that more beneficial or even compulsory to some degree, where information is shared, and not so adversarial. But
Yeah.
in the governmental perspective, we still have many of the stovepipes that existed before 9/11 around, like when we broke down for a global war on terror, when it came to law enforcement and intelligence agency being able to paint a common picture of a threat. And let's not kid ourselves, whether it's cyber, whether it is cybercrime or nation state, is a real and present danger to the United States and our operating in the safety of our American citizens. I personally think we absolutely need those barriers to come down to a further degree, so intelligence can share more data with law enforcement and vice versa, and there's more sharing that's sort of below the tear line with commercial industry. That's not after the bang, right? I mean, we do need to see if we can share better. Do you have thoughts on that? I mean, you've been on both sides. You still work both sides. I mean, you are a trusted member of the intelligence community as a commercial researcher. Your opinion is solicited at the White House and other agencies. So, what are your thoughts on sort of the mechanisms of sharing when it comes to cyber?
I don't know if this comes out of the fact that I did some of this kind of sharing work back when I was still in government, and without sharing too many details, it was like you're trying to talk about something that's public, and you get told, "Nope, nothing leaves this building," and it takes a whole year to say, "Wait, this is like 1 million people have watched this thing. Can I please just talk about it for X reason?" Right? But that goes back to changing the way that you think about the problem in front of you. And so when I talk about these partnerships with our government partners, one, they like both sides, government and private sector, are doing a really good job at like just kind of jumping in. Now, some agencies and organizations, I would say, are further ahead or more willing to lean in than others. But there is progress every single like half a year. I would say that there's been some pretty darn good progress in bringing some of those barriers that you talk about down. I spent 2 weeks over the last 6 months with government partners from several countries, in intelligence community and law enforcement, plus some of us in the private sector, talking about these exact things, which is, okay, how do we enter a conversation with the stated goal of our goal is to get to yes, our goal is to get to the point of sharing. Let's start with that versus I'm entering the room with my scroll that says these are the 50 reasons I can't tell you anything. And so
Right.
sometimes it's a mindset shift, but I think that in order to do the work, we've got to do the work. And so it's not just being in the room talking about, oh, what are the frameworks with which we're going to share? Those are very important, but we can't only do that. Okay, this is a specific strategic objective. Here's our 50,000 foot view. Those are important. That can't be the only work. The meeting cannot be the objective. We need to do the work to do the work. So I'm a big fan of let's pick a problem, let's go after it, let's learn from it as we do it, and then build from that. And so I think if you look at something like the takedown of Lockbit. So for those who don't know, Lockbit was the largest ransomware operator out there, and it was several year long operation that really changed hands in terms of which government in the world was in charge of that. And in the end, it was the UK's National Crime Agency leading on that with support from various others. And what you see, if you look at any of the reporting on that, that was actually the coming together of law enforcement, intelligence, private sector in a really wide-ranging sweeping operation that included not only the takedown of infrastructure, not only trying to get information back that's going to help victims, but also an influence, psychological operation type campaign. The audiences weren't just the general public; it's also these criminals that are carrying this stuff out. I use that as an example because that's people getting together to do the work and then
Right.
learning from
Right.
it. And we're in conversations with folks all of the time about how do we build on from that kind of success. And so none of this is a really like concrete answer of this is my 5-step plan for you, because I think that we get a little bit too prescriptive. I think that we look to solve these things at scale, and there are some things we can solve at scale. You talk indicator sharing, let's talk about that. How do we do that at scale? Fine. But when you talk operational impact to adversaries, to threat actors, when you talk how these partnerships work, people are still in the middle. And so, yes, somebody rotates out, you got to rebuild that relationship. But I think that sometimes we're a bit too hard on those in the government and those of us in the private sector saying, oh, we're not doing enough. And there are probably areas where that's the case. But we just got to keep being in there, keep doing the work, build on the success that's happened, because there's been a lot of it.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think we all do give a lot of lip service, like we need to share more, share more. But when it comes down to organizations, we don't tend to do it, right? So
Yeah.
we want everyone else to share. We just don't want to be part of that solution. I say we in the royal we here.
Yeah.
Just pivoting, just for time's sake, I did want to get to a subject I've been harping on with almost every one of my guests because I think it's one of those things that's changed our environment to a degree that I don't think we fully even comprehend yet. And it's really two things. The first is the power potential and pitfalls of AI. Um, and not only I think we've talked a lot about it in terms of the job displacement and the power, and kind of the fear of AI taking over and taking the economy. But what I don't think we've talked a lot about, I want to get your thoughts on, is when AI models are offered freely, but the underlying algorithms are manipulated to get a certain amount of sensibility, if you will, or generate a certain amount of or manipulate a certain viewpoint by the prevalence of data. I think we saw it in our political landscape, but more importantly, as China rolls out more and more of these AIs to use around the globe, do you have a feeling or a sense of the impact of when you're talking huge sources of data, they're starting to be used, they're being leveraged, but the subtlety of the data manipulation, or the presentation layer thereof, where data, or at least how we think of those data gets skewed. What are your thoughts on that?
You know, so before I came in this world, one of the parts of my job was looking at broader foreign influence. And as I was looking at that as a general problem set, you look at information and humans and their consuming of information, and you look at how that landscape has changed over the years. And boy, we know it's different. I often show
Mhm.
this video if folks can go look up the on YouTube or whatever. You can look up the video from the Today Show about what is internet, and I think it was from 1994, 1995. Watch that video, and it's full, and it makes some really good points because many of those points are points we'd make today. We'd be like, oh my, with all of these other streaming apps, you've got TikTok and Instagram and pick your new thing. Like, it's just so much. Do I want this? Do I not want this? Humans were not meant to consume as much information as we do today. If
Mhm.
I go even to when I was younger, you had your world news at 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock. You had your local news at 6:30. You had another one at 10 or 11, depending where you were time zone wise. And that like this was just before you start to have 24-hour news and all of this. And so if you only talk like even on just the TV, how our media environment has expanded. And then now you talk the access to so many different applications and voices and publications in the palm of your hand all day, every day.
Mhm.
One, digital and media literacy is so important. So you add an environment where the collective population is not very good at that. Most people are not good at saying, oh, this invokes a really big emotion. I'm going to go double check. If I have such a strong
Mm.
response, maybe I should see if this is actually legitimate. Am I looking at something real?
Gaslighting. Yeah.
Am I looking at something that is, overblown? Am I looking at something that's completely fake? I don't know. And most people don't even verify that. So for me, the AI component of this is concerning in a couple ways. One, it's just building on an environment that we have right now where digital and media literacy is so critical. Critical thinking is absolutely important.
Mhm.
These are skills that we need to work on. And this is not just about younger generation coming up, it's all ages and populations really. But then you add where in many senses we are at the end of like human verifiable information. And so as AI,
Mhm.
machine learning, all of these different things were coming to be, I know the projects I worked on, it was humans verifying all of the inputs in there. Um,
Mhm.
and so there absolutely could be errors. It could be skewed. We're humans after all. But you had some control to that. And now if you have one, a malicious threat actor purposely giving false information, um, that's problematic. Or if you have AI systems being trained on AI generated content, so not even human
Right.
created content, you've got another layer there. And then you add that together with our ability or inability or evolving ability to actually discern what is right, good, true. um, it's this confluence of events that we already see playing out.
Mhm.
We've been seeing play out as everyone has more and more access to media, but it could be used for different scale of insidious things. So before, if you had, whether it's a conspiracy theory or just a lie or a bad story, often that bubble was contained, and so that meant the scale was smaller. The impact is going to be less than some global impact. But when you start talking about our digitally connected world with things that can operate at such scale, the impact of this potentially bad, wrong, incorrect information, the scale is just much larger. And so it's absolutely something we need to be
It's
thinking about.
it's almost Orwellian because you get to the point where you can magnify something to the point where people just take it as rote, even though it's not true.
That's a different problem. Yeah.
And you can pick your side of the aisle where this is true, right? I'm not even going to talk about topics because it, it, the what I just said is true on both sides, right? Of whatever political argument, whatever emotional reaction you have, there is a potential for that to be manipulated. I call it fear porn, right? I mean, the algorithms, not even of the AI models, just of social media platforms that reward clicks based on things that horrify us and engage us and magnify, very polarizing views. You take that and you add the power of AI and I have a I can't help but worry very very deeply about the next 20 years in geopolitical history, just based on what it does seem like capabilities are getting beyond our ability to figure out what they mean for us. But before I leave you altogether, the same goes true for quantum. Our entire security apparatus is built on encryption algorithms that are almost non-existent unless we change them dramatically using different protocols like quantum resilient algorithms, et
Mhm.
cetera, which I don't think many companies have even started to contemplate. And although I've heard a lot of experts in the field, I am not one, talk about, well, we're probably 5 to 10 years away from this being a problem. Every time I hear one of those predictions, they're almost invariably wrong. It usually happens within 3 to 5, right? I mean, we were talking about AI as long as machine learning and supervised machine learning, and hell, and then boom, it was here, and it's been life changing, right? And so, any thoughts about sort of the quantum cryptography problem and quantum resilient technologies from the cyber perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I think it goes a little bit along with the AI conversation, though, in terms of, um, the core investment in the big brains that are expert in these areas absolutely coming together. The research in this space is absolutely critical. I do think that these are areas where governments do often lead, and or government funded research leads, because
Mm.
if we leave it only to the commercial enterprise, often well, not often, businesses are incentivized to make money. Like, this is how they continue to be in
Right, right.
business. And so when we fund research, that's going to be absolutely important for things like this. You want those really smart people in the room talking about what the future is. How do we go against this? And, I think it's important to just be put on the radar. It's a topic of conversation. I think anybody that's attended a conference for the last couple of years, every topic has been AI. You start to see every once in a while quantum being put out there. But to your point about not being an expert in this space, I think that we have to fully embrace, and those of us who have the time or the bandwidth to sit and listen to the key experts, that aren't going to be able to summarize their thoughts in that quick 1 minute soundbite.
Mhm.
It's important that we're listening and seeing what's going on. It's important organizations themselves. I know we're having these conversations about, what do we think about this? How are we preparing for this? This is absolutely, luckily we have some super smart people that study these kinds of things as part of the conversation. But it is going to be a mixture of what government themselves are doing in this space, what research is being funded, and then how that comes forward. And the one last thing I'll say, because I don't want it to be all doomsday type, because in general, that is not where my mind is. When I talk
Mhm.
about the threat landscape in AI, for example, I do talk about it changing the speed of the game, but not completely the game itself. And so
Right.
that doesn't mean that will be our conversation around quantum. I think that there is definitely some game changing that's happening there, but um, sometimes we do need to pause and say, okay, there's a lot going on here. There's new threat actor names popping up. There's sometimes new technology that they're doing or approaches. We've got evolutions in AI and the application of it. Let's talk about what we have in place today. Does it protect us? Is it going to suit the needs for where we are now? Does it need a big tweak, no tweak? Like, let's actually understand what we have in front of us. Because, like I say, with that AI conversation, often from a cybersecurity perspective and what's going on in the threat landscape, we already are protecting from how these threat actors are using it. Again, and not about changing the game, but the speed of the game. That does not mean there
Mhm.
won't be outliers, but we know that most organizations are going to be impacted by the more common things. And so, um, uh, what I always talk about is, and I think you and I have probably got similar way we talk about this, but you talk about incremental progress is very important. How we respond is important. It's not, cybersecurity is not an all or nothing game.
Mhm.
You come down to things like patching internet facing vulnerabilities, multi-factor authentication, broad monitoring and detection in your environment. Those are absolutely key. They're the basics. They're not easy, but they are the basics that need to be done. And those defend against most things in our threat landscape today. And I think that needs to continue to be the conversation. We absolutely need big brains focused on the outliers, whether that's the outliers in the threat landscape and knowing the ins and outs of that, whether that is things like AI or quantum. We need big brains thinking about what's going on with the state of geopolitics and threat actors there. But also getting back to the core for, me, myself, the business that I'm dealing with, the organization that I'm in charge of. Am I continually making progress? Am I moving that needle forward? Because we are collectively getting better at security. That is really important for folks to know. It is within most organizations' gift to keep making incremental progress. You don't need a bajillion-dollar budget to do that. And so, if I go back to the top question you asked me, this is part of why I think the threat landscape matters, because understanding that, having conversations with people looking at it day in, day out, can help you better prioritize where are you going to spend that next security dollar. It can help you say,
Right.
okay, from my risk framework, maybe I'm not completely bringing this down to zero, because that's pretty darn hard to do, if not impossible, but I am making progress. I am operating from a defensible position, and that is really, really important.
Yeah, I've often said, and I've heard this repeated, I don't think you can protect a network, but you can defend one. And oh, by the way, Murphy's Law of Combat. If it's so, if the enemy can't get into your environment, you can't get out, right? So we will always have some degree of risk that has to be accepted. I will say that I agree with you. You don't need to be faster than the person next to you. Oh, you don't need to be faster than the bear, just faster than the person next to you. And I think that's true in cybercrime. Maybe not so much in nation state, but certainly with cybercrime, uh, the business is about get in, get out, get paid. If you raise the barrier or the bar to entry higher and higher, it just becomes more effective for them to go somewhere else. So there's a lot of wisdom in what you say. Alex, I can't tell you how much I really, really appreciate this conversation and you joining me. You remind me every day of just how smart the people in my network really are, to which you clearly have illustrated why I consider you a great source of intelligence and common sense and wisdom in this space. And thank you. Can't thank you enough for joining us.
No, thank you so much for having me on.